For those of you that don't know me, my name is Bryan, and I am a member of Berkeley Community Church here in Berkeley, Michigan. And I was asked to share my story, and I hope that it touches somebody somewhere and might help them. So my story is a little about myself. I spent 22 years in prison, and it was because I grew up angry and lonely and scared. So being able to tell my story tonight is a dream come true, and I'll explain why at the end. So, I was born in Columbus, Ohio in 1971, and it was a good life. It was easy. I felt safe. I was loved. I knew that I was loved. But what I didn't know was that at a very early age, I was adopted by the man that I knew who was my father for the next 12 years. So about the third grade, we ended up moving to Detroit, Michigan. And it was a big change, culture shock. And I just didn't know how to fit in or what to do. And I was scared. I felt alone. And at that time, my mom and dad were having troubles and they separated. So there was tension at home, which caused a lot of turmoil and strife in my family between me and my siblings, and none of us knew how to deal with that. And then being moved up here to a different state, and I went to a predominantly black school at that time, and it was new to me. And at that time, it was there was some boundaries and separation, and I just didn't know how to get along. So at school, I was picked on, really bad. And that added to my, fears and, insecurities and not feeling safe. When the other kids were going out to, recess, I would go to the bathroom first. And then after I came out of the bathroom, the kids would all be outside, and I would go back in the classroom and hide under the teacher's desk because I was scared and tired of getting beat up. And it was just, it started that hole. I had a hole my whole life. So, along with being, picked on at school, I was picked on at home by my older brother who was going through his own issues, had some anger issues, and he took it out on me. So it was really tough. We ended up having to go to counseling because, we were kind of so messed up with our lives, as young kids. And I can remember one time having to walk to counseling, which was maybe a half a mile away. And as I was walking, there was a car that was following me. And I would walk one direction, and then I would turn back around just to see if they were following me. And then they would do a U-turn, and they came back. And finally, they pulled into a driveway right in front of me and tried to get me into their car. It was scary for me. It was really scary, and it added to that hole, that I had in my life. It was just such a scary time for me. I couldn't feel safe anywhere that I was, at school, at home, walking down the street. And because of this incident that happened, it scarred me. I mean, I don't know how long it was, but for months and months, if I were walking down the street, I would always look, 2 or 3 blocks down to see if any cars were coming at me. And if I did see a car coming, I would run and hide in somebody's backyard or duck down behind a car and just hide until that car went by, because I had this feeling that those guys were coming back for me. It was painful. It was, and I knew I was loved at home. I knew my mom loved me, but I just didn't feel safe anywhere. We ended up, my mom and dad ended up getting back together for a while, and then they were on again, off again. My mom pretty much raised us by herself, 3 boys, so we worked hard. we had to have paper routes at a very early age to be able to contribute our part in growing up. So we had chores. We, ended up having to go to Catholic schools because the Detroit public school system was so rough. It really did some damage to us, and my mom saw that. So we ended up going to a Catholic school for a year, and that was the safest that I felt. I was going to, Mass. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand Mass, but I just felt this warmth when I was there. And we were able to go for a year, and then Mom couldn't afford it anymore. But at that time, my mom and Dad, he was my adopted father, got back together, and we were able to move out to the suburbs. And it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad, but we still had the fighting between me and my brothers. I was 12 years old, and I came home from school, and my mom had made dinner, and my dad was there, and we sat down for dinner, and my mom said, "I have something to tell you boys." So at this time, there was me and my older brother Brent, and my younger brother Chris. Well, Chris is my half brother, I believe. So it's my mom and the father that adopted me. That's his biological father. So we were sitting down to dinner, and my mom said, "I just wanted to tell you that you boys were adopted by David," which was my dad sitting at the end of the table. And she said, "And I wanted you to know this tonight because your biological father contacted us, and he wants to meet you." I wasn't sure how to feel about it at that time, but years later, I found out that I was so mad at the guy who raised me, who I called Dad. Because he didn't say anything. I thought that he should have fought for us and said, "No, we're a family. And I'm not going to stand for this." We ended up going to Ohio to meet my biological father. And immediately I resented him because when we pulled up to his house, he had a nice house, and he had 3 boys and a girl from his new wife. And I saw all that they had. And I was angry because they didn't have to deal with the stuff that we did. Being scared to go to school, being scared to come home, having to shovel snow in the wintertime and give the money to my mom so that we could have Christmas. But I put on a good front. I tried to like him, and I wanted to. I wanted to like him. And I think he tried in the beginning. He allowed us to come down in the summertime and taught me my trade, which is plumbing, and I'm forever grateful for that. But there was a hole, there was a void, there was something missing. And when we went back home, Mom and my dad, who I always called Dad, divorced. And they, I don't know how long later it was, but he tried to ask us if we would come to his wedding of the wife he was marrying, and I just never talked to him again. I never talked to him because I was so angry that he wouldn't hold this family together. So I had some issues, through high school. I met a girl in high school, and it was just a short stint. We danced at school, and she plays into this story 30-something years later. But I was missing some things, so I turned to drinking. I was working all the time in Ohio for my dad, my biological father. And I thought maybe I could earn his love by plumbing and working for him and being around him. But I always knew that he loved his other kids more than me and my brother Brent. I just didn't feel the connection. But I tried for years. I ended up drinking heavily on the weekends. And I didn't see it as a problem. I just drank on the weekends and thought it was just a part of growing up. But I, learned later I was trying to find something, and I was looking for it in alcohol. And I couldn't find it there, so I met a young lady in Ohio, and I ended up dating her, and we got married. Because I thought maybe that's what I needed, was to be married and find, a happy relationship. And maybe it could turn out differently than the ones that I had been around growing up, And unfortunately, I ended up pretty much ruining that girl's dreams. I got her pregnant. And she already had a 3-year-old daughter when I met her, and I raised that little girl for the next 7 years, along with the daughter that my wife became pregnant with. And during those 7 years, I ended up fighting with my biological father to the point where we had to part ways. And I started my own business, and I made a lot of money, and I think that was the beginning of the end for me, because I didn't know who I was, and I thought I could buy an identity. I couldn't find it in the alcohol. I couldn't find it in marriage. I couldn't find it in children. So I just kept looking, and I ended up meeting some guys, and I thought they were just the coolest guys, and then I found out that they were into cocaine, and I started hanging around with them. And since I had so much money, I was able to provide the money that they needed to buy more and more cocaine, and I just thought it was the glamorous life. But when you get into that life, you end up using that product, and I not only used it but abused it to the point where it started affecting my life pretty badly. I was not, functioning the way that I had normally, paying attention to business, coming home when I should be coming home. But I ended up hurting my sinuses pretty badly because of the cocaine. So I thought, okay, this is great. I'll just stop, and that'll be the end of it. And I did, and I got back to normal. I still wasn't emotionally connected with my wife. I just thought if I worked and provided monetarily, that was my duty. That was all I had to do. A friend of mine called me one night and said, I want you to come out, and I want to show you something. And he introduced me to crack cocaine. And it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. I'm going to speed this up just a little bit. The cocaine took me to a place that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I ended up committing crimes because I spent all the money that I had saved. I was stealing money out of my wife's purse. Nobody trusted me. And eventually my wife moved in with her mother, and I had nowhere to go. So I got lost in that world. At one point in time, I was homeless. And I don't think I've told many people this, but I got to the point where I had to eat out of a trash can one time because I was so hungry. I was so lost. So I ended up committing a bunch of crimes in the state of Ohio. And in doing so, I was running from the police. So I would come back and forth to Michigan because I had my mom and brothers up here. And in doing that, I had committed some crimes in Michigan. I ended up getting sentenced in the state of Ohio to 11 years in prison. And I went away angry and hollow and lonely. And those 11 years, I learned nothing. I learned nothing in there. You know, I saw the guys that were going to church or reading the Bible on the yard, and I just thought, man, you guys are so fake. And I was cruel in some of the things that I said to them. But one day they released me, and I came home to Michigan. And, you know, I tried to fake it, you know, like I was a changed person, and I was, you know, living with my mom. And during the course of the time I was away, the internet came out, so it was something new to me. And my sister had come over one day, and she said, I'll show you something. And she showed me this thing called MySpace, kind of like the Facebook today. And so she showed me my older brother's Facebook page. And since we're talking about my older brother, he's the one that used to beat me up and hurt me pretty bad. But I'll tell you, today he's a great guy. He turned himself around and turned out to be a great guy. So I was looking at his MySpace page, and he had a list of friends. You could see their pictures on there, and I saw a picture of Shannon, and she's the young lady that I danced with 30-something years ago in high school. And I told my sister, I said, I know that girl. I said, how do I say something to her? How do I talk to her? So my sister made a MySpace page for me, and I wrote Shannon, and didn't take long. She wrote back, and because she knew where I had been, because she was still friends with my older brother, and so she had heard things and kept track of, you know, how I was and where I was. So she knew of my past, and I didn't quite know it at the time. I thought I was just reintroducing myself to her after so many years. But she welcomed me, knowing my past, knowing the things that I had done. And she wrote me and asked how I was doing and told me about her life and her 3 boys. And she was so happy and so proud of where she had come from and where she, you know, was at that point. So Shannon and I wrote back and forth periodically for about a month, just catching up. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a friend. And one day she said that she was coming up to Michigan. She was in Ohio at this time, and she was coming up to Michigan and bringing her boys up to see their grandparents, and she was going to visit with her mom and dad. And she said, can I stop by and see you? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. And she came over, and my mom was there, and, you know, we had lunch, and we just talked and caught up, and, you know, she shared her story with me about her boys, and how she was doing. And towards the end of, our visit, I asked her a question. I said, Shannon, I said, when we were kids, I said, we were 15 years old. I said, and there was something different about you. I said, and I can still see it. I said, what is it? And she took a minute, and she looked up at me and she said, I'm saved. And I said, what is that? She said, I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And that changed my life, her sharing that with me. She said, can I pray for you? And I said, sure. Only because I thought she was going to go home and pray for me that night. But she took my hands right then. And she started praying. I don't think I've ever heard anything more promising, more hopeful than the prayer that she prayed that day. And it didn't impact me or affect me right then. I thought it was a wonderful thing for her to do. But again, I was still so angry and so lost. And I didn't know who I was or where I was going. I knew I had still some stuff still going on in Michigan that I had to face. And she ended up going home. And, we stayed in touch, and she talked to me. And, I told her one day, I said, I'm going back to prison, right? And she said to me, not before I had the opportunity to introduce you to Jesus. And I thought at the time a lot of good it did me. I said, I'm still going to prison. So that was in 2008. And I went to prison, and Shannon, being the girl that she is, stayed in touch with me. She sent me a Bible, and I still have it. It was about, I can tell you, it was 3 months later. It was February 24th of 2009. And I was running on the backyard in prison. And I had picked up running in there as an escape, because it was what I had done my whole life, is run. Just run from myself, run from the fears. And I was running, and I ran and ran and ran. And on that day in February, I just felt so heavy, so overloaded and hurt, that I just stopped running, and I dropped to my knees and I cried. And that day, I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And I don't know how it was for anybody else, but for me, it was instant. I felt it. I knew it. I knew it was real. And I went back to my cell, and I opened that Bible. And for the first time in my life, I understood it. And it spoke to me. It came alive. I ended up reading that Bible night and day. And I was so hungry for his word. And I wanted to get to know him so bad. I looked and I looked everywhere inside prison for somebody to talk to and share the word with. And I thought to myself, nobody wants to talk to me after the things I said to them about Jesus. And I felt alone again. And I'll give you a description of how that cell block is laid out. It's like a big warehouse, and it houses 300 men in 8-man cubes. And I was in a particular cube, and across the hallway was another 8-man cube with 7 men in it. There was an empty bunk in that cube. In the state of Michigan, they do a lot of transfers. So periodically there's a bunk that comes open until somebody fills it. And one day I was in my cube and I saw a guy coming down the hallway with a cart with all of his property on it. And he stopped in that cube, so I knew he was going there. And I'm sorry to say, but I judged him on the spot. He was just the weirdest looking guy. He was a black guy. He was a black guy, and he had a bald head, and he had a ponytail that stuck straight out of the side of his head. And he had long fingernails and a scraggly goatee. And he had a look about him. We all had a look about us in there. We had the look that says, don't mess with us until we let you in. So you just never knew. But I watched him unpack that day. He was unpacking his property, and I saw a Bible come out of his box, and he set it on his bed. And I said, I don't know. But I watched him unpack, and I was curious. I'm like, maybe I could talk to this guy. But I saw his prison number, which was a 194 number, which means he's a lifer. And you usually stay away from lifers because they're angry and they don't want to talk. And just because he had a Bible didn't mean he was a Christian, because in prison, Muslims read the Bible too. And it, for whatever reason. So I just didn't know. But it was put upon my heart to talk to this guy several times. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And one day I came home from work early and I was exhausted. And I climbed up on my rack and I put my blinders on so that I could cover out the daylight. And as soon as my head hit the pillow, I was wide awake. And I looked over at him and he was sitting on his bed. And he was reading his Bible. And I knew I was supposed to talk to him. And I looked up and I said, I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to go talk to him. But if he gets mad at me and punches me, I'm going to be upset. So I walked across the hallway. And I walked up to the half wall and was looking at him and I said, excuse me. And he looked at me, he said, what's up? I said, I'm supposed to talk to you. And he said, did God send you? And I said, yeah. And he did. And he jumped off of his rack and came out in the hallway and he hugged me. And he said, I've been waiting for you. He said, you see, I was at another prison, and God told me I was leaving. And he said, I didn't want to leave because I was comfortable where I was at. But God told me I had work to do. And he hugged me and he said, I'm glad you're here. And his name is Kevin Stepney. And he became my best friend for the next 3 years. He walked with me and showed me what it was like to be a Christian, a true Christian. I can remember shortly after he gave me that hug, I asked him what religion he was. And he said, man, I've got so much to teach you. He said, it's not about religion. It's about relationship. So for the next 3 years, we held Bible study after Bible study after Bible study. On the yard, in the TV rooms, anywhere we could find a spot, in the gym. And people came. People came, and I was ferociously reading that Bible. And I would participate and share right along with him, to the point where people started asking me to lead Bible studies. And I got prideful. And I came back to the cube one day and I said, man, they really want to hear me talk and share the word. And he said, big head boy, he said, it ain't you. He said, they want to hear God, and he's speaking through you. He said, so don't get the big head. Just to end with this, one of the most favorite times that I can remember in there with him was at 10 o'clock, they would turn the lights down in the hallway to kind of calm all the prisoners down. It was like good night time. So it was quiet, and I would creep over into his cube, and I would sit on his footlocker, and he would be curled up in the corner. And I would get his attention, and he would turn over, and he would have tears streaming down his face because he was reading the Bible. And he would say, Bryan, he is so real. He is so real. I said, I know. I love that guy. So I ended up spending the next 3 years there, and then I got transferred. And I went to another prison and continued doing what I was doing there, which was going to Bible studies and attending church. And then a group called Kirex came to the prison. It was an outside organization, and I got heavily involved with them. And they asked me to share my story one day, and I did. And afterwards, there were just numerous guys that came up to me, and they said, that was Kevin you were talking about with the ponytail, wasn't it? And I said, yeah. And they said, he changed my life too. So Kevin is still in there, God willing, and I know he will. He's going to let him out someday. So I ended up getting out of prison, thank God. But this time was different. I came out a different man. See, the last time when I got out, I knew I was going back because there was something missing. But this time was different. And I knew it. And as hard as the addiction was, and as deep as the fear and the loneliness and the anger was rooted inside of me, I knew I could make it this time. Because I had a relationship with Jesus. And I finally understood what being saved meant when Shannon said it years ago. So I am now a member of Berkeley Community Church, like I had mentioned earlier. And I wanted to say that this being a dream of mine for so long was because during those years that I was trying to get to know Jesus, I had so many questions. And the one person I knew that I could call and get the answers from was Shannon. And she helped me in so many different ways. You know, she would read through the Word with me. She would pray with me on the phone. She would send me books that were very helpful. And she was just a big part of my, whole prison sentence and my walk with Christ. But during that time in prison, I always hoped that I could become a member of this church. Because I knew that this was the place that she was getting fed. And that she was a part of, and I knew that God was here. And I wanted to sit here someday and just be a part of it. And today I am. But it's only because when I asked Shannon what was so different about her, she did what God told her to do, which was share the Word with me. And she did it. And I know it was hard. I know it was hard because I was such a thug, punk, an unbeliever. And I can't imagine how hard that was for her to sit there and say, I'm saved. Maybe it wasn't. But to me, that took courage. A lot of courage. And she did what God told her to do. And I'm a firm believer that this was ordained, this was predestined, because I wouldn't have received it from anybody else. Because I saw who she was. I saw her walk. I saw how kind she was. And I knew it was real. And the other thing was Kevin. You know, there was a racial divide in prison. You stuck to your own. But Jesus was able to tear down that divide. And Kevin stepped out of that cube. And he didn't just hug a white guy. He hugged a Christian brother. But I'll tell you, I think the greatest miracle was that in my darkest hour, when I was being punished for all the crimes that I had committed, and they were bad, Jesus found me. And I was supposed to be locked up. And he set me free. It was the freest I'd ever been inside prison. I learned in there that it's not about religion. It's about relationship. And today I have that. Well, you know, the hole that I had was, you know, partly of my own making, partly of my upbringing and circumstances, and how I internalized that. You know, those things that happened to me also happened to my brothers, you know, but they didn't turn out the way that I did. So it was something, you know, that I had allowed to become part of me. So it made an identity. It gave me an identity. I identified with being lonely and being scared, and I latched on to that, you know, so that I made that who I was. And it was so ingrained that I never thought that I could shake it. And that's when the drugs came in and it overtook my life. But it allowed me to forget some of that stuff, the deep-rooted issues. And I thought to myself, well, my issues is I'm just a drug addict now. And I hadn't focused on, you know, the issues that led me there. And I thought I'm never going to change. I'm never going to change. But when I saw what Jesus could do in somebody else's lives, in the books that I read, I wanted that. And I chased it with a passion. Well, when Jesus came into my life, I felt lighter. I felt that I had somebody that was there to do it with me. I knew that everything wasn't gone, but I knew I didn't have to do it alone anymore. It wasn't just me fighting this battle. I had him to lean on. You know, I read a scripture. It was Exodus 23:20 that says, I will send an angel before you into the land that I promised you. And he will wipe out your enemies, but he won't wipe them out in 1 day or 1 year, lest the land become barren. And to me, I took that as the Holy Spirit. He gave me the Holy Spirit, and we'll work on this together. We're going to work on this together, and then we can overcome these issues that you have. But I can't just wipe it away. So coming out, I still have some issues. I still have issues. I still have, you know, trials. But I know that I don't have to do it alone. You know, I understood it to be, I'm going to take something away, but you have to put something back in, lest the land become barren. So now I fill my life with Scripture. I fill my life with Jesus. I fill myself with Christian and brothers and sisters and church. It's not easy. It's not easy. Let me say this. After 22 years in prison, coming out is hard. It's very hard. But Jesus makes it easier. You know, I have a lot of stuff going on. But because I stay in the Word, because I'm around friends that speak the Word, I have hope. I have hope. I always knew that I was going to be a drug addict forever because it had such a stronghold over my life. I don't believe that anymore. I know it's not true. I finally beat it because of Jesus and my relationship with him. In my situation, I started out with alcohol, which wasn't enough. It didn't dull the pain enough. It didn't take away enough hurt. So I switched to cocaine, and I thought that was what I was looking for. You know, it numbed everything, but I was still able to function. But when I fell into that dark pit of crack cocaine, it was like the devil just had his arms around me. I didn't think about anything but my next use, finding a way to get high. But along with that, getting high, trying to forget about the loneliness and the pain of growing up, now I'm running from the shame and the guilt. I couldn't go home. You know, I'd start out my run with $1,000 in my pocket, and when that ran out, 2 days later, I hadn't been home, hadn't called my wife. I couldn't go home. The shame, it was unbearable. To the point I would make myself homeless. So I was fighting double the pain of my past and the pain I was causing now. But it wasn't just me causing myself pain. I hurt so many people. And in my addiction, I always used to tell people, I'm not hurting anybody. This is my business. I'm only hurting me. So mind your own business. But that's not true. I hurt so many people. You know, today I'm fortunate. I say I'm fortunate. But I complain about it sometimes because it's hard. I'm fortunate. I have a good job. I make good money. I have a lot of things. But in that, I ended up hiring a buddy that I knew in prison. He was out, and I hired him. And I told him, I said, we come from the same place. I said, and I'm hoping that we're heading in the same direction. And I gave him a job, and he worked with me. But I could tell that he was still fighting. He was still battling with his past. And I had to tell him, you know, you can't do that. You can't get high and work here anymore. And we had to let him go. And Jimmy ended up dying about 3 weeks later because of his addiction. But because of where I'm at today, I was able to meet his kids, and I stay in contact with his kids, and I talk to them, and I share the good things about Jimmy. I have another person in my life who's going through it, and I find myself wanting to just do my life, and I have so much that I'm trying to do, and God has told me that I just can't do just me. I have to help. So I'm, going to meetings, and I'm helping with people that have addiction now, just because they see what Jesus has done in my life. I asked Jesus in prison one time, I said, why am I around all these hard-headed people? I said, please tell me. And that night, I dreamed of Ezekiel 1-3, and I read it. And God told Ezekiel, he told him to go and preach my word. Eat this scroll, it is sweeter than honey, and spread my word to these people. But they are stubborn and obstinate, and they will not listen. But I still want you to do it. And I do that today. Sweeter than honey.